Hello everyone, Kenty Tiger here with Bengali Engineering in Play. This is a mock-up of a drop pod landing bay. So this was an idea I had with the drop pods which you see on my workshop, and what I wanted to do is just kind of do a mock-up, something that could actually be pasted in, built into a ship. So obviously this is pretty good sized. This happens to be 6 tall, and the reason for it to be that tall is we really had to have the doors. So one of the goals here was this is entirely vanilla, which is really to say it's entirely vanilla except for the decorative mod, um, the decor mod. So I think that's what they call it. Let me look that up real quick, just to make sure I'm not telling you wrong. Yeah, the decorative pack DLC. So the decorative DLC. So the reason why is because all of the drop pods actually use the different pieces, like the kitchen, the bathroom, the beds, um, the desks, that sort of thing. So we basically needed that to accommodate the drop pods. The drop pods really aren't anything special. So let me just demonstrate what this looks like. So this is a simple toggle on off that controls these doors. The doors are grouped, so it just makes it easy. So in this case there are 4 drop pods. Now you can see the blast door blocks here, which are more narrow, so the collision box is a little bit smaller, which is what was needed to accommodate, because these things are 3 wide. So there's 3 wide, and then there are plates and windows on the side. Let's go ahead and go. So facing it is bay 1, 2, 3, and 4 respectively, left to right. So this is of course the drop pod. This is the 2-man drop pod here. Obviously you could build this with the 1-man drop pod that's one block smaller. Oh, excuse me. So each bay has the individualized controls. Obviously you can tailor these to whatever you want, but you've got the door open. It is not reversible, and this was intentionally so because you open the doors, you extend, and then you drop the ship. So in this case it's the reverse command on the pistons. So the pistons are grouped. There's 2 pistons here, and the reason you can't see the other one because it's in the bulkhead here, but the pistons extend together, which was the only way to get the length to get the drop pod entirely out of the bay. So open doors. So the idea here is that the doors could close with the drop pod partially extended, all the way extended, with the piston hanging out. So the idea was that you have to do something very purposeful, intentional, to close the doors on something. Now you can do that obviously, but you cannot do that without intentionally doing so by going into the control panel and doing something. So the idea was from this button panel, so just pushing buttons, you can't chop off the end of the piston. So each of the bays, they're identical, all 4 bays. So obviously if you cut and paste and put a lot of these together, then you could have any number of groups. You'd have to go through. Oh, pardon me again. Late night, not enough coffee. So obviously you would go through and change everything that says Bay 1 if you pasted another set, and I would recommend, if you do paste, now you can paste any number of these things. They're set up in a group of 4 at this point, which is enough to accommodate 8 persons. So obviously if you had a big battleship or something, you very well could have that many people or more, depending on how many players are in your world, um, to control the ship and that sort of thing. So obviously, if it comes time and the commanding officer issues the order to abandon ship, something that every commanding officer just utterly despises doing, but if you have to, you have to, and drop pod bays may be the only escape. So the drop pods, uh, so identical. The drop pods here, as you can see, parachute hatch. So the idea is that we are plummeting into gravity, and we just need to get the crew out. So we have the airlock here that comes into the bay, and in this case you can see the doors. So we come through the airlock and we have a choice of either dropship 1, dropship 2. So we can go right in. Obviously, one is just upside down from the other. So as you enter the ship, as you enter the drop pod, then you may be a little disoriented. Upside down is relative in space. So again, all 4 of the bays are identical. All 4 of the drop pods are identical. So the idea here was, if we were to paste this end to end, what you could actually do is just chop off this set of blocks and then paste the entire assembly onto the next one. Really, you should copy first and then change the all the designators. So 1 becomes 5, 2 becomes 6, blah blah blah. Now, when you change the groups, obviously you're going to have to change how they are controlled, because once you change a group name, they will drop out of anything that is programmed with that original group name, will no longer be there, even if you just change the group name. I know I kind of said that redundant, but even if the groups are the same, which is to say all the same blocks and devices are the same, but you change the name, it still drops it off the world. So this outer ring here was just to give me something to put a button on. So there's 2 buttons here. In this case, it's a button on each end. They do the same thing. It's just open and close the doors. So obviously with the doors on, you see they're green. Will open close. So let me go ahead and close these, and we'll demonstrate some of what this thing does. So what I've done is mock up all the control stuff on the back here. So in this case, sun is almost straight up here. So I put solar panels on here. Obviously you're not going to have solar panels inside your ship. So the solar panels here are just to keep the mock-up going, keep the batteries charged on the mock-up while it's working. So 3 timers to control everything, 2 timers to deploy, and 1 timer that is a system reset. And we'll demonstrate all those. Obviously you don't really need the system reset on the ship, whatever you're using to accommodate all this. Obviously the gaseous portion here is just for this mock-up as well. So there are conveyors that go through the bulkhead, so everything on this outside would chop off. Now the warning here is that the back of the piston for all 4 bays here is under this steel plate. So the catwalk plate. So don't just global, click, right click, drag, to delete everything. Okay, so don't global delete, because you will delete the piston, which will completely hose you. You'll basically just have to delete and repaste this whole assembly into the world again. So be careful. So the reason there is these two block sections here, and in fact the catwalk plate, is to make the bays airtight, because the pistons are not airtight. So obviously with the holes on the corners, they're not airtight. They're like the tanks up here. They're not airtight. So so this is the mock-up. We have our gaseous section, because we do have air vents inside. So we've got two LCDs here that tell you basically what's going on. 3 button panels. Pardon me. So how it works: upper button panels, pods deploy. So this actually triggers the timers, the blue and the green timer over here. The middle button panel, what does that do? Well, that just basically turns off the merge block, the bay side merge block. So there's no controls built in to the pods to actually turn off the merge block. The merge block there just stays on all the time. I mean, you can turn it off by getting into control panel, but in the end, it's not directly addressable. There's nothing programmed to turn that one off. So this is the bay side buttons. So basically, when you trigger to deploy, they will open the doors, go all the way out, and then wait, and then you can deploy from here. So this button is of course on the back side. So just reading what this says here and kind of describing what it is. So the middle button panel is just the launch, and that is literally turn off the merge block for those bays. Timers control the pod deployment. A first timer, which is blue, okay, so the right side timer, right side top timer, it opens the doors, so it just triggers open, and then it triggers the second timer, which is really to say it starts the second timer. Now the second timer has a 10-second delay on it. So for those of you who are not familiar with how the timers work, when the timer is first triggered, there's a timer. It's why it's called a timer. And then at the end of that time, whatever the time happens to be, then it will start executing how you have set up the buttons. So this tutorial here is not about timers, so I'm not really going to go into detail there on how they work. Hopefully you have played enough with timers. I think I did do a hangar bay depressurization, repressurization thing that did a lot of timers. But there's a couple folks out there who do a lot of good tutorial videos. Splitsy, for one, has done basically a tutorial on everything. Awesome information out there. So triggers the second timer. Boom. 10 seconds. So the doors now are opening. So the idea is that second timer waits until the doors open before it does everything else. It disables the doors. So the idea behind that is to prevent accidental closure with the pistons all the way extended. And then it moves all the pods to the drop deploy position. Alright, so let's go ahead and do that. The lower button panel just turns off the merge. Use the lower button panel to drop pods. Oh, whoops, sorry, that was not lower. Let me change this. That was originally the middle one was the lower. There was not a lower. So middle button panel turns off the merge blocks. So that's why we do these tutorials, so I catch myself on crazy things. So system reset. So if we think about things in terms of the oh shit moment happened, we're deploying, we push the button. It's one button, boom, everything deploys. So they go out into the drop deploy position, and then all you have to do is drop each individual one. So you get the ready from the folks in the drop pod and push that big red mushroom button that drops it. So, you know, pod 1 ready, you push the drop button. Pod 2 ready, push the drop button. Pod 4 ready, push the drop button. Okay, so pretty straightforward there, but that's manual. You can set it up in the timer if you want to, a timer. So basically deploy is a full deploy, lets them go. Now the reason I didn't do that is this is a mock-up. So I didn't want to have you need to go chase those things down and reattach them, which is kind of a pain in the butt. All right, so if we push the deploy button up here, the number 1 button, then the doors open and then lock out, which is really to say turn off, and then all 4 drop pod piston groups push the drop pod out and then stop. So that's all the deploy section does. You've got the 4 buttons for manual, and again, you can program those to actually do the drop. So you could have 1 button that would, you know, deploy the drop pods and drop them. So the reset here, so system reset, button panel triggers the reset timer. Pretty straightforward. The reset timer does everything. The only thing the reset timer doesn't do is close the doors, and the reason it doesn't close the doors is because there's not enough slots. That's really what it was. Now the only thing that I could do there is actually create a group with all of the pistons in it and use that group to reset everything, but I did not do that. So all of the piston groups are independent right now, but you could actually do the retraction with a single piston group if you wanted to. That's easy enough to do. So triggers reset timer. The timer does everything. So by pressing button 1 on this bottom panel here, it triggers the reset timer, which is the red one over here. So the left side lower timer. And obviously when you build your vessel, you may or may not have a, you know, timer room or something like that. So you just pick a timer. The timers can be anywhere on the grid. It doesn't really matter. So obviously with the mock-up, I just put them here. Just like likewise the boatload of batteries here. The batteries are just keeping everything going. So that's the whole idea there. Alright, so by pressing button 1, it triggers the reset timer, the red one over here, which will, 1, turn the bay doors back on. Got to do that at some point. It retracts all 4 piston groups. Okay, so it pulls all 4 of those in, and it turns all 4 of the merge blocks back on. Turn on all 4 merge blocks. Okay, so merge block for each bay that's attached to the end of that piston. So we really just have 3 functions here, but turning the bay doors on, because they're grouped, is 1 slot, and then it's 4 slots and 4 slots. So there's 9 slots. That covers all 9 slots. So the only thing we could do here really is either create a merge block group that has all 4 of those merge blocks, and that's actually kind of makes some sense. So basically everybody, you get a Roger up from, you know, 1, 2, 3, and 4 drop pods, and then boop, 1 button and they're out of here. So that would be pretty easy, and then you could actually, when the doors come all the way closed, or you get that retracted all the way in, then the doors close. Now the other reason I didn't worry about that was really to totally reset this and close the doors. Sorry, doing that to you again, forgive me. the closing the doors really would require a fourth timer. And the reason for it is the timers are kind of going to work in pairs, because you need to do whatever your initial action is. In this case, turn the doors on, um, is got to be done by one timer. And you want that to happen instantly. So the way the timers work is you have a time, however long you want to elapse, and then it executes everything in the button bar, everything in the toolbar. So if you have an action that needs to be performed immediately and then pause for something else to happen, then you actually need um, another timer to do that. So basically your first timer is going to trigger that initial action, whatever it happens to be, and one of the next actions in the toolbar is to trigger the timer, the timer that actually pauses and then does stuff. So depending on how how you need to do that, you may actually need to use 2 or even 3 timers. So for example, in the tutorial about hangar bays, where you're depressurizing a bay, as part of, basically you push one button and it uses 3 timers to control all the functionality of depressurizing and then opening the doors. You can put lighting and everything else in there, warning lights, main lights, that sort of thing. So in this case, we only need the 2, but so they can be nested timers. In the case of the blue and the green here, we need that initial action of get the doors opening. Then we trigger the second one, which actually is the delay, which is wait for the doors to completely open, because you don't want to drive the drop pod into the door. So we have to have that pause, but we have that initial action trigger the next timer, which is actually the delay, then do other things. Alright, so let's demonstrate how this works. We got the one button up here. We're going to push the button. So we're going to push the button and then run out to the front. And you can see what is going on. So the doors are opening. We're going to watch the doors. Let me come to a better angle. There's the doors went off, which was the action in the other ones. We see that all 4 of the pods are deploying. And deployed. So you can see all the merge blocks are green. So the only thing that would happen at this point is for the command authority, whatever it is, to release those drop pods. Alright, so at this point it's at the deployed state. So what we're going to do is, so here's where you would push these magic 4 buttons. Whichever drop pod is ready to go, push the button, off it goes. In this case, we're just going to pretend that happened, and we're going to use the number 1 trigger reset timer. So triggering, and we're going to roll back out here, and what's happening here is you see it turn the doors back on. So the reason it turned the doors back on and then triggers these things, because it all happens at once. So it basically executes the entire toolbar simultaneously. So using 2 pistons to get the drop pod entirely extended, but yet there is enough space to accommodate the entire drop pod inside the vessel. And then close up our doors. So obviously the possibilities are endless. Cutting and pasting with some creative editing in between would let you accommodate any number of drop pods. Stack them side by side, top and bottom. It really depends on the size of the vessel. Now, were it me, then I would actually have these four, and if I were to have 12 or 16 persons, or 12 or 16 drop pods, then I would stack these on top of one another. Obviously, I would be, renaming every group. So every group is every group, and then integrate all the different groups and control mechanisms into the vessel itself, because this really isn't that wide. So unless you're going right down the middle of the ship, so what I would do is, this would go across from port to starboard, and then it really would take up not very much of the space, all things considered. And then whatever on the outside, this could actually, this whole row here could actually be the outer hull. That wouldn't be too crazy. Now, the only differential there is these things and how they accommodate, so the problem is, how do you get people into these bays? Now, whether we do that on this side, which is certainly easy enough to do, as long as you could run the doors through right here, right next to the piston, and that would be fine as well. So it really depends on how you have everything set up. In my case, I just put them in on the side, which is bay 1 and 2, and then bay 3 and 4, and you just basically drop right down, and you have the choice of going right or left into one or the other of the drop pods. So in this case, it was just 2 doors to accommodate 4 drop pods. Now, depending on how you have this, if this goes out the side of the vessel, then this may be a great way to do this. This may be a passage through here, and you just see, oh, that's an escape trunk. Obviously, if you turn this thing sideways, and we're dropping out the bottom of the ship, and that's kind of what I had. My thought process was, we had engineering or something in the center here, and you would have either bays end to end, or you have a starboard side set and a port side set, depending on how wide the vessel actually is. So how you ultimately accommodate the escape trunk, so this would be like the port side, and then you have the passage coming through, catwalk or something coming through the middle of engineering that just spawns off, and oh, there's an escape trunk, and then right out the bottom of the ship. But obviously, if you turn this sideways, then this is a great big huge bulkhead with one single door that only goes there. So trying to go in between, which means then all your passages are coming from the top. Now, the downside of coming from the top or the side, depending on if they go out the side, however you design everything, is that the idea was how to get into each bay with the fewest number of escape trunks as possible. So in my case, I just did it through the side, which is either the side or the roof, or however you look at it. So you may end up being able to do the same thing just by tunneling down through. So anyway, that is the mock-up of the drop pod bay. So 4 drop pods here and everything. So thank you, everyone. This is Kenty Tiger signing off. Thanks for watching.